Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, and I'm excited to announce a new show we're going to be doing monthly. It's called What's Happening in Model Railroading. We're going to talk to manufacturers, we're going to talk to product reviewers, hobby shop owners, and all the folks that have all that good inside information on new product releases and a whole bunch more. And there's no better person to talk to about all of that than the editor of Model Railroad News, Tony Cook. Tony, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ray, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Your show is up and coming. I've listened to quite a few of them, and I've really enjoyed it.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's definitely good to have you here. We've talked a lot offline. We've talked on other podcasts. We've chatted a lot, but now, hey, we're here, and we're going to chat about some things. What we're really focused on is you've had some pretty busy time out in St. Louis, taking in all the reports for new products out in St. Louis at the St. Louis Railroad Prototype Modelers Meet. Then you went to the National Train Show, Gateway, the NMRA National Convention. So you've been pretty busy, and I'm sure your notebook is full of lots and lots of notes on new products that are coming out and all the dealings in the world of model railroading. So looking forward to hearing some reports on that.
St. Louis was the place to be this summer for model railroading, that is for sure. Myself and my assistant editor, Shane Mason, went over the last weekend of July for the St. Louis Railway Prototype Modelers Meet that you mentioned, and it is one of the best in the country. It is fun to see all the different work that guys set out that they do. Manufacturers show up more and more every year with new products to display, and then naturally there's a bit of swap meet stuff too. I always end up, but in fact, this year on the way back, we had trouble fitting the dog back in the car. My folks live near St. Louis, so we bring my dog over and leave him with my mom and dad. And then we were down about half hour south of there in Collinsville and stayed there for the show. And so, yeah, getting back, it's like, well, do I take my trains back or does the dog get to go back? But they both made it, but it was a close call.
Oh, that's a good thing, yeah. And
it's a fun show.
And those that can't see it, we have video where we can see Tony. I see his dog has made it back and is knocked out on the bed. And you were telling me earlier that it was well fed. So,
indeed, yes. I split my time between Missouri and Texas these days in a couple of different spots, and we are currently down visiting Texas as we record this today. So he had brisket for breakfast, which was left over from last night, and he had part of a ribeye for lunch. So lucky dog indeed.
Lucky dog living the good Texas life. So,
but yeah, the RPM meet is always good for, as I say, seeing stuff, but new products more and more. I was thrilled this year to get to see. I remember the announcement on Prairie Shadows, which is a small company. They did the Trenton Works 5250, which looks a lot like the American Car and Foundry or ACF Centerflow, which would be, like Intermountain makes one of those. Atlas has a new one of those. I think that might be the Athearn Blue Box cubic foot of that old from the late 60s. But this Trenton Works is a mid-90s that was built for Canadian roads. Some of them have made it there, like the one I took home from the show. I borrowed one from Mr. Gruber that was the Prairie Shadows gentleman and did a review that's in October's Model Railroad News of his 5250, and it had NS reporting marks that it was a patch. So some of them have made it into U.S. hands as well. But that Prairie Shadows 5250 is due by the end of the year, and he's already announced another car. He announced it a couple weeks later at the NMRA show, and it's going to be Trinity's 50-foot high cube box car, and this is that newer style where you've got both the vertical and horizontal like ribs to the side of the car, and it's a single plug door, and they're late 90s. But that's going to be yet another car, and from what I saw of his 5250, it was a well put together car. So this high cube box car that he has coming should not disappoint, and that's in a number of Canadian roads and about 5 different styles, which is the same for his 5250 hopper. Comes in about 5 different brake gates, roof hatches. One size in the hobby, just as you know, doesn't fit all anymore at all. So it's amazing. But these little companies that keep coming out, I've had people say that, man, where do all these, small companies show up and big companies too. That was, the other this summer has been Class 1 Model Works based out of the Kansas City area has come on the scene with that well car that they're doing and 2 containers, a Monon and Hyundai prototype. That well car they're doing, it's the TWF-10. And it was fairly unique. It's got really neat trucks. You've probably seen the release on it, that it has special trucks and kind of has skirting over the trucks a bit. The well car is very distinguishable from others, but there were only like maybe 100 of them built or less. In about 1990, it's a fairly early well car, but there are a few still around today, but it's a nice single unit. That's their first model. But then they turned around at the national show and announced a GP40 diesel, which I've had loads of. Oh my gosh, what's going to be the sound system? Is it going to have ditch lights on this? Is it going to have, it's like, I don't know. And a lot of the information's not out on it. We've got news coverage on that. I've put up on Model Railroad News' Facebook page, and it'll be in the magazine with illustrations of the 8 road names. They're doing 8 different road names in the first run, which that's a healthy group.
Yeah, let's talk about these small manufacturers for a second, because I was noticing the same thing. Now, you mentioned Prairie and Class 1 and others, and it does seem like it just. What spawned all this new manufacturers? What do you think's behind it?
I don't know how I don't know where some of those come from, because so much of that seemed like there was a real threshold there to getting products made. And now it seems like you look at like David Lobach of Tangent Scale Models. He goes back to like 2007. So my gosh, that's now been about almost 15 years ish. And when he started, it was like, wow, this guy's really going to do this Cadillac of 4750 covered hoppers. And I remember when it came out, I thought, this is spectacular, but I bet we never see another thing. That I can't believe he can follow this up. And my gosh, look at the catalog he's got now.
Right.
You've got like Nick Molo at Moloko stuff that, he did like caboose detail things, and now has got, again, fantastic rolling stock freight cars with a ton of projects that are on the way. And then you look at companies like, Blaine Hadfield, after he left Exact Rail, started Arrowhead. He has that Railgun, which I don't know if you've ever got to actually look at. Do you have one of those? His Railgun that he did. Oh my gosh.
I don't, but I've been hearing some really great things about them, and it's just amazing. So one of the things that I seem to be getting out of this is that it's like the cottage industry. Maybe that's not the right word, but it's like, it's just amazing. Like the cottage industry used to be maybe a little less than what some of the big guys could do, but now they can compete and create some amazing product.
And, we always had that. You can go back in the 50s and look at old issues of Craftsman or Model Railroader, and there's guys making different kits, a lot of, and even through into the 70s, 80s, but you're talking pretty crude wood or metal castings. I mean, there were always that kind of garage or basement businesses that, okay, yeah, this guy makes a whatever, but be prepared. Yeah. You're going to have some work. And yet now, again, whether it's like Prairie Shadows, Arrowhead, Tangent, Moloko, the new Aurora Miniatures, those little containers have come out where the doors open on the container cars. There's so many of these companies now hitting the market that are putting out cars that if I took the box away, you'd look at it and go, oh, I don't know. Is it Athearn Genesis? Is it Proto? Is it Intermountain? I mean, again, there's nothing, and they're made in China. I mean, they should be of that. It's not like, oh yeah, this guy makes these in his garage when his truck's not parked in there, but no, it's amazing. Some of these products and the stories behind them. I know over at A Modeler's Life, we interviewed, and the name's escaping me, and he's a fairly young guy. That's the Aurora Miniatures contact, that Aurora Miniatures International, that's done the containers. They've done 2 different containers. They have that SD60F diesel locomotive on the way. They've talked about C30 and C36-7s for HO scale. And then they have announced a new Gunderson high cube boxcar similar to the Prairie Shadows, though it looks like Aurora's is a double plug. And that guy, we talked to him and interviewed him on it, and he literally was I think he's Chinese, so he knew Mandarin and was on forums there talking with them on different things, and basically was like, have you ever thought about making this or that? And the company said, well, I don't know, what would you like made? And that's how I think that kind of blossomed into. So again, some of it is the communication stuff. We're at a time, your guest, Dan, is it Dosa?
Yes.
That does the Minnesota commercial. He, a few weeks back, or whenever that show came out, he talked about the communication we have now, whether it's emails, the Facebook post back and forth, the video stuff we do. The communication is so different just in the last 15, 20 years that it has made kind of an explosion in the hobby. I mean, when you go back and think, and you can see it again, if you page through old issues of magazines, letters somebody will write. Like, I see Athearn made this boxcar. Do you know, did Pennsylvania own this boxcar? And it's funny it's like, wow, somebody actually wrote that letter in to one of the magazines asking about, I think it was like that X58 ribside boxcar that Athearn brought out in the late 60s. Like, what is this car actually? And it was and again, it just is amazing to think of, well, why don't you just go online and search a picture of that Pennsy road number and see, is it on that one freight car website, or ask somebody on Facebook, hey, what's the prototype for this car? So, and I remember those days where you literally would open Craftsman or Model Railroader and like, oh my gosh, look at the inside back cover. Atlas is making an SD35 in HO scale. Where did this come from? And that was the first you saw or heard of it. And I occasionally will get those kind of scoops out in Model Railroad news, but yeah, generally we know about things way in advance because communication is so different today. And I think that is aided in that, and it still is a challenge, just the language barrier and such with China, but getting those products made, again, that is today's. Yeah, this guy used to have a drill press in his basement, and he made this or that for Varney steam locomotive kits, so you could have this different boiler arrangement. And now this guy sent plans over to China, and he's had an injection molded, high quality boxcar made. And it's like, whoa. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll go back to what you said about Dan Dosa when he mentioned that communication. I'll give you the same answer I believe I gave then. I think we're living really in the golden era of model railroading. Really are, because it just, and you nailed it, the communication, the ability, and the gentleman you were talking about, I believe it's Ben Wang.
That's correct. Yes. Yes.
So, but yeah, whether it be Ben Wang or any of these others that can, not only just have a great idea and then maybe submit it to the big manufacturers and hope that somebody's listening. They can just take it into their own hands and say, here, I want to make this because it's a passion of mine, and really drill down on just those things. And it's really amazing and benefit all of us. And the consumer, that there's folks like that out there that are willing to do this and really put their passion into manufacturing and do all that research that's required to learn how to contact a factory in China, and then, be able to do what provide them the information they need, and then do the back research of, when you're building something, getting all the measurements right, getting the details exact, and being able to do those things is really, really cool and beneficial to all of us.
And again, that has changed things so much. In fact, we're working on, for HO Collector, one of the other publications I do for White River Productions, we've got we're starting a survey on the AHM freight cars of the 60s and 70s. And they did like the helium car, the vinegar tank car. They did all sorts of goofy cars that were done mostly by Roco in Austria and Mahano in Yugoslavia. And when you look at them and wonder, like, why in the world would they have ever picked this like calcium carbide container car, which, you have to dig and find out what that even is, when at the time there was probably no good sliding door 50-foot boxcar on the market. It's like, good Lord. But they're all in the car and locomotive cyclopedias from Simmons and Boardman. You go through those of the 50s and 60s, like, well, this is obvious that, like, Bernie Paul at AHM probably had a copy of that, had it mailed over to Yugoslavia or Austria and said, here, make cars like this. And those are some things they picked. But when you talk about that research involved, it's interesting. Like, for example, looking at some of those, I think it's their FlexiFlow car, which now Rapido has made just a beautiful version of that PD 3500 that was a New York Central exclusive in the late 60s. And they just announced an N-scale in early and late body styles. But the old AHM Roco is the same on both sides, but the car actually, the pressure differential piping and such really should only be on one side. And the side they photographed and put in the car cyclopedia to show the piping in the system for pumping air through to unload and load the cars. So they made the model the same on both sides, not knowing the difference. Yeah. And when you think of that today, it's like, well, who would do that? Like, obviously you'd go from more than one little black and white one side picture, but not then. I mean, yeah, it's like, well, we have a picture and we're going to go with that. So again, that it's things now you'd never even think of committing to a project with, well, what's your research? Oh, this 8x10 black and white picture of one side of one car. Like, wow, I hope that's enough.
Yeah, where when there's others and not just the I say the big dogs, I guess. People are getting, drawings and blueprints from manufacturers now, and now all that stuff can be easily transmitted and shared, and what a world of difference it makes, and again, benefit us.
It really is. That Keith Revell from KR Models, who's doing that wonderful Shay.
Yes.
He's doing a standard gauge Shay, and he's got production examples of it. I ordered one. I can't even remember what road name I bought now. But I ordered one when he first announced that. And, he does that interesting thing where he basically puts it out, starts taking reservations, and then when they hit the minimums or, okay, I can do it, he makes them. And he's done a lot of UK prototypes, and I think they're 00, the 176 scale. But this Shay is his first foray into North American stuff. And he's got a log car to go with it, but then he's got brand new, I can't remember if they're Gunderson or Trinity. And again, he went to the company making those cars today, and he's like an aggregate hopper, a center flow. He has 3 or 4 freight cars that are all on the order or the planning stages with KR Models. And again, he's another one that just decided to do it, and that I like his process of you can order it, and when it hits it, he will make it. And that Shay, I think, is going to be just a fantastic locomotive. He had it at the National Train Show, that it was on display there. And again, I think that'll fit the bill for a lot of folks looking for a real high quality Shay. And you can Google KR Models, and you'll find there's a UK site and a US site is on his main page. But look at the UK stuff. Don't just automatically click on the North American side, but take a look at some of the things he's made for the UK as well, because it's amazing stuff. So yeah, again, he's another company that, wow, where did that all? When he first contacted me and I saw the name Keith Revell and he said he was going to be making model trains, I thought, oh my gosh, is Revell coming back? Thinking of the collector side of me gets all excited. I'm still waiting, but no.
Well, that's great, and be able to fit niche kind of things. I mean, that's not it's really, really neat to see. So we talked about some of these up, and you mentioned some other 50-foot high cube box cars. I don't know if you saw my ears perk up, because I'm just a big fan of 50-foot high cubes, and I have a small layout, but I don't know, for some reason I just got to keep buying 50-foot high cube box cars, so my wallet's going to be in a lot of trouble by what you reported. You mentioned Aurora, and then you've got Prairie Shadows. You said is another one that's really come out.
Right. The Prairie Shadows and the Aurora Miniatures announcements are both the same modern Gunderson, where it's both the horizontal and vertical ribs. Now, I don't know if you've seen or picked one up yet, but there's a new Tangent. They did the Gunderson Greenbrier. It's the 60,089 cubic foot, 50-foot high cube box car. It's only owned by SP Cotton Belt and Rio Grande. They had it at the RPM show, and my dad and I are both big Rio Grande fans. Okay. And David does that a lot, where he shows up at the shows with a brand new car. Just like, oh, wow. I see these, and he only had like 3 Rio Grande cars left when we got there Friday afternoon. So for the RPM's only been open like a couple hours. And I said, is this all? I said, I don't want to take these, but is this all you got? He said, yeah, this is all I brought.
Wow.
I said, well, Dad's not going to be here till tomorrow, that I can't buy one Rio Grande and have him show up tomorrow and there be none. So I bought 2 of the 3 he still had at like 3:00 in the afternoon Friday. But it is a beautiful car. Tangent does, I think Tangent and Moloko, again, they are cars that are beautiful just to look at, the way they're put together, all the detail. And that's just a great looking car because it's on the Hydra Cushion Southern Pacific scheme. It's one of the first Action Orange with the flying Rio Grande and the Action Road that was introduced about 1970. They're late 60s to about 1970 prototype, but it's a beautiful car they just did. And in that era of, the crazy IPD, the incentive per diem, like the rail boxes and such, Atlas surprised at the National Train Show with CNFC, and I still have to look it up because I don't know who that is. I like you, some of these car builders, I don't know if I've searched that or found it yet, but 1,500 of these 50-foot sliding door box cars, and they all look the same. At a glance, you're like, oh, isn't that the old Athearn rail box? I'm like, well, yeah, just like any F unit's an F unit, but it can be anything from an FT to an F9. So not really, but it's going to be an Atlas Master Plus, which is their high-end, all new tooling. They were built in the 1970s as part of the IPD thing. I know the Rock had some, and then of course you're going to have a lot of, I think, like in their press release, they show Moscow, Camden, and St. Augustine, all these railroads that had all their boxcars come home. They didn't have enough track to park them on. Yeah. And it looks nice. And it's got two different body styles for the ends and the door rails, 5 different doors. I mean, I think it's going to be, and it was a bit of a surprise. They announced that, and then they announced the other car was a 2-bay hopper that's ProTech, and I'm pretty sure it's a 100-ton car. They had a 3D printed sample of it. It's a typical 2-bay kind of rib side hopper that would look something Pullman Standard-ish. But as you remember, Pullman Standard and a lot of the builders kind of faded out after about 1980. And this ProTech 3,000 cubic foot car is kind of one of those that came in to take the place of some of those earlier car builders. So again, to look at it, you think, well, could that car be painted Wabash? It's like, no, not really. Yeah, it's close, but no, by this time Conrail and CSX would have been in existence, would have been not those older roads. Right. But that's 2 cars there from Atlas, and Atlas showed a bunch of, they picked up the Trueline Trains MP36 and are redoing it. They showed their first samples of the O-scale Multimax auto carrier. And you talk about the 50-foot high cube boxcars. You're an HO guy, right, Ray?
That's right.
Yeah, and I am too. I mean, I collect a little bit of everything, so I can even show you some like TT if you want to see it. But the O stuff, I can't help myself at times. Right. When a high cube gets done or something really cool, oh my gosh, I got to have that. These O-scale Multimax cars, they had 2 of them sitting there at the St. Louis National Show. And again, those are just things that are like, that would look so cool on top of a bookshelf, even though, I don't really run or I don't do O, but that's awesome. Yeah.
Oh, it is hard. I am an HO guy, and I get exactly what you're saying. You walk by these, and it's just that eye-appealing scale. It really is. It's just, and then
there's a wow factor.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Go buy a locomotive, and you see one of those, especially if it's something you own in HO, and then go see it in O scale, and it's like, oh boy, and that's exactly what you. It's like, I can't run it anywhere, but do I have a shelf? This would really look real.
It's so cool.
It is. Yeah. It really is. It really is a very cool scale. And
I bought, like, Lionel has done a scale. In fact, I reviewed it. I think it's in the November Model Railroad News. I reviewed. It's an orange. It was ACF in St. Louis built. It's a 4-door, 86-foot high cube that they did in conjunction with Ford. And then Southern Pacific, Wabash, and Louisville and Nashville, because Ford was looking for a standardized, okay, how can we ship all these auto parts? We want the car to have this size opening and, whatever interior things to hang up or bring in bins of, windshields, whatever, hoods. And it was a development car, but then ACF didn't stay in the high cube business. Greenville, Pullman, Thrall, they built all the high cubes. And Lionel made that orange one-of-a-kind Ford stamping plant, or Ford stamping, it says on the side, high cube. And again, it was one I couldn't resist. I'm a big Ford Lincoln guy, so it's like, I got to have that Ford high cube sitting on a shelf someplace. So yeah, those are fun cars.
They're definitely. So any big O scale releases during any of the shows?
Well, as I mentioned, the Multimax from Atlas was shown, and I think that's the first time it was shown. In Bachman's announcements, they're doing, and narrow gauge is huge with a lot of folks. We do narrow gauge annuals both in HON 3 and ON 30 at White River, and Bachman does a lot of both the O narrow. In fact, they even do some of what the largest FN3, I think. But there's a Baldwin 280 consolidation that'll be back with Tsunami 2 sound, metal gears, and that's a Bachman Spectrum ON30 model. It's going to be out in White Pass and the United States Potash, and that'll be a neat looking model. I've been toying a little bit with ON30. Mm-hmm. My assistant editor and I are both kind of into Colorado narrow gauge. He took his fiance out for a trip on the Durango and Silverton a couple years ago, and they still got married this summer. So she, put up with it. Yeah. So see, it didn't. Yeah.
Yeah. You lock that down when that happens. When it's acceptable,
it
lock
worked,
it down.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, wow. Yeah, exactly. And I bought us each 280, or I think they were 280s. There's regular consolidations from the Spectrum line. I got them. Train World had a big sale and got us each one, and we're working on detailing and putting sound into them. We're doing two different approaches. I think we're doing TCS and the soundtrack sound for both, and kind of playing with seeing what we like better, and we're going to have that in the magazine coming up. But that, as far as O, was kind of one of the announcements I saw. And then G scale, if O is not enough for you, Bachman has a -9. The big -9 wide nose is coming out in G scale. I think it's tooling they picked up from, it might have been the Pulp Aristocraft line, but I'm not 100% on that. But they have that. They've got an Evans 53-foot double plug, which is like the Scale Trains kit and the old Details West car that is now in the Athen Ready to Roll line in G scale. And then they've announced a Jeep 40 in G scale. And again, that's another one that you show me something in G and suddenly I'm Donald Duck in the backyard, digging up things and chasing Chippendale around laying track. But yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's, when you start to see those scales, it's so, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like, to me, it's like it's almost to the prototype, it's just, when you start, and then you get these manufacturers and the details are able to provide on these models. It's just absolutely amazing. So, yeah, you become you become a rail fan of the smaller scale when you start. Yeah, that's how it feels. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, most definitely. And Bachman had a ton of stuff they announced in addition to those couple things I mentioned. They put out, and they've been doing that more in the last few years. That Bachman traditionally targeted the New York Toy Fair was always like January, February, and it was everything. There's like the Nuremberg train show that's big in Europe, then New York's Toy Fair. Back in the day, that was Lionel, American Flyer, to like Tyco, those companies, because they'd show everything that's going to be this Christmas, like in February. And Bachman still, their annual product catalog is pegged for that kind of February, March availability. But they've done more and more where they have an NMRA group of announcements, and this year was that new kind of that duck build Acela 2,
right?
They're doing that. And I think that's going to be awesome. That's going to be in a train set, and they're doing the new Simmons Venture passenger cars that are in like Midwest service. In fact, if you look at Bachman's announcement, our Justin Sobek from Model Railroad News, it's a picture that he took of one of them on the Missouri River Runner out where he lives around Pacific, Missouri, west of St. Louis. But those brand new cars are going to be out, and Bachman has really been knocking it out of the park on some of that. That Charger, if you've gotten to see one, I bought one of the day ones, and then we got for review one of the regular livery of that Simmons Charger they did, and it has the TCS wow sound. That open back screen panel lights up like the prototype, and I mean, it's an amazing model. So I have real high hopes for these Simmons Venture coaches will be beautiful too. So
excellent.
Neat stuff there.
And the Acela 2, kind of near to me. I live in Connecticut along the shoreline. We'll be seeing these new units. So it's good to see manufacturer like Bachman come out with this and kind of keeping up with these new releases as they hit the rails.
And I think it's supposed to be, I saw their Acela model have the switch that you can use catenary to power it, which I've never seen that. Have you ever seen anybody that really does that, runs electric models, but runs it from overhead?
I have not yet. I know I've been to a layout recently that had catenary because they were trying to do the New Haven area, but it didn't work. So I'd love to see one that actually is powered.
I would too. Yeah. Whenever I see that, like, oh, you can flip a switch and you get power from, I'm like, oh, come on. Like, it's not hard enough to keep the rails hot. I'm going to have these wires hanging overhead, and you're telling me I can make that work? But it's supposed to have that. And then, of course, Bachmann, for their Easy Track, has now shot the concrete tie version. So you can get that look to the track work if you want. And that Acela set will come as a full package set with the concrete ties, the whole thing. I believe it's DCC sound. I'm pretty sure. Yes, it's DCC ready. I'd have to look at that again, but I think it is. And then they're doing the business class, so you can add on to make longer trains. But that's the complete opposite of old narrow gauge. There's blazing state of the art, brand new futuristic stuff. But right. And the one Bachmann thing that I've had more emails on out of this show announcement was the BL2. Yeah, the poor ugly duckling BL2. And I love that, as everybody does. Who doesn't love a loser?
Yep.
First one was that horrible Yugoslavian made for AHM in the 60s that I think is too wide, too tall. It rides on FM trucks. It's almost a BL2 if you never saw one. That's probably a BL2. And then, of course, Proto 2000 launches in 1989 with their BL2. And I've always been surprised since, what was it, like the mid 2000s that Walthers picked up the Lifelike Proto line. When would they bring that BL2 back? Because as good as it was for its day, you look at it now and the grabs are a little thick. It mistakenly got done with Blomberg M shock absorber trucks, which no BL2 rode on those.
Yeah.
So I always felt like it could use an upgrade. I'd love to see it come back. And I don't think it was ever offered with DCC sound. So that too. So now it'll be interesting to see, because Bachmann's tooling of like its Shark Nose, their Jeep 38-2, a lot of the more modern toolings they've done are really nicely done pieces. And that BL2 is going to be DCC on board. And I'm eager to see how well it comes out. It's got 4 prototype road names coming in the first release, and it'll be all the Bachmann stuff is sometime next year.
Excellent. Yeah, I pulled up BL2. The prototype of a total of only 59 units were built of that. So be interesting.
Yeah, it's such an odd piece and a real misstep by General Motors, because here they basically write in the book on diesels, E units, F units.
Yeah.
And by this time you've already got like Alco's RS1, so we know the short hood cab, long hood is the way to go. They're trying to make something that's got better visibility for switching and branch line use. So they take basically that F3 and like just start carving slices off of it until you can look out its back a little bit. And it's like, oh. But then within a couple of years, they introduced the Jeep 7, and they're back on their game. But yeah, their BL2 is a complete, wow, where did that come from? Electronics-wise, too, as I was mentioning, Bachmann, they've got a new Easy Command, which is a good starter DCC. They have a new edition of it coming out next year. And Soundtracks has Blue Nami.
That was a big one during the show, I'm sure.
So. Yeah. And I think looking at it, that Blue Rail, and that's who they've worked with or licensed through. I've had that Blue Rail app. There were some regular releases that used it. Like you get the Bachmann FT came with that for a while. And it's a nice thing. You load it on your phone, horn, bell, the usual effects are buttons. You've got the slider switch for the throttle, and it looks like they've enhanced it. But essentially they're going to bring that out. And it is a good, I have a lot of people that are first getting into the hobby or really seasoned hobbyists that have been around forever that still feel like, I just can't get into DCC because of all the programming side. Why can't they make it simpler? Why can't it be more, here's the button for this, and I don't have to hit function keys and have to know what this means? And that is one thing about both that Blue Rail, which is the Blue Nami app, is once you load that up and you see that screen, it's obvious. It's like buttons on your car. Here's the headlight thing. Here's a horn symbol, and you just hit that stuff to make it happen. Same with the directions there, a red brake stop button that is like, duh, yeah, this, and it's on my phone. I can walk around with it. So it's a neat system. I'm eager to see, and it does have a lot of programming to it. I know a lot. You can kind of think, oh, that's too simple. I want to be able to do more. It does have screens you can step into to make those adjustments and things you want, but there's not that big learning curve of looking at, some of these controllers that, like, is this a Star Trek thing that, wow, I don't know how this works. Yeah.
Yeah. So for anybody who hasn't heard about Bluenami, it's a mobile app that operate in either DC, DCC, or wireless mode. And what does it take to run one? Did you catch that part, Tony?
I think, as I remember with the ones I had before, it had its own decoder that you put into a locomotive. So soundtracks will have that, obviously, I think, to work with it. And then you do have to have a base. I think you need a base system that it runs off of.
Okay.
But it's been a while since I've ran it. But I know we have reviews coming up. There's videos online. George Bogota is a great guy, and I know he's got videos out there both on Facebook and YouTube to go look that up on Soundtracks, and there's information out on their website. But again, if you're still one of those folks, and I totally get it, that looks at DCC as if it's one of those awful Texas Instruments catalog or calculators that you had to buy for that one math class and thought, I'll never use this again.
The TI-81 that I never have touched again. Yeah, that one. Yeah.
With that awful sign thing you had. It's like, I saw that on Facebook recently. I can't remember what it was, that it had one of those with the little flag, and it said, yet another day I'm marked safe from having to know what the Pythagorean Theorem is in my adult life. And right. I thought of that Texas Instrument calculator. It's like, yeah, another day that can just sit in the drawer with the batteries rotting in it someplace. Like, the boy at the time, it was like, really? I got to pay how much to have this calculator? Uh-huh. And they probably don't anymore. I'm sure you can do that on a computer today, but
I sure hope so.
I was going to say, ages ago, I had something I had to go buy. But anyhow, back to what we were talking about.
Yeah, Bluenami. So what I look at it as, and I really think that's, it's bringing the younger generation that is a phone generation, and we talk about TI-81 calculators, but they are a phone generation, and, what they can do with their phone, if they don't have to go out and buy yet another device or yet another throttle or whatnot, and it gets them where they can control it and run, a locomotive that way. It's great to anything that comes forward that helps the younger generation get involved in our hobby is certainly good to do.
It is awesome. And I'm thrilled that Soundtracks is jumping in on that, because that Blu-ray was a smaller company and I would get samples from him and information from him. And I always felt like, it's great stuff. Bachman did it in a couple of different bass releases too. They saw the value in it, but I just felt like he, wasn't getting over that hurdle and getting into the market well. So I think with Soundtracks, behind it, that will help it quite a bit. And we need that in the smaller scales, because like Lionel with like their Lion Chief and their apps, they've done it for the big toy trains, but for scale railroading, we're still a little bit stuck on coming up with a real simple way into DCC. So I'm hoping that'll be a boom for them.
Yeah, and when one comes up with it, it kind of hopefully will get the other ones involved in kind of doing those kinds of things as well. So definitely be something to keep. Yeah.
Well, I don't know how we're doing on time, but I know for some of the bigger companies I don't want to leave out those folks like Scale Trains announced their AC 4400. Which they've done a -9. The AC 4400, of course, is the AC traction motor version of that. And the tell on it is what the different truck side frames, and it's got the openings below the cab windows for those AC traction motors to be vented. But in effect, to glance at it, and you might say, oh, isn't that a -9? It's like almost, but not quite. That they're doing that in HO's rivet counter. Their first MTH acquired toolings, the 4-bay open hopper, will hit as a kit classic. And then, of course, the S-scale caboose and a boxcar and either a gondola or a hopper, they had samples of those out, will be coming for S. And, those 1/64th guys, which I don't know why. I've got a couple friends that are 1/64th, so I know half the guys that do S-scale. I joke there, but anyway.
I know at least one of them, but and potentially two, but...
so they're always, well, how come this isn't made? Well, how come that isn't made? I'm like, oh, go ask one of the N-scale guys. that says, well, how come this didn't get made when it got made in HO? And I always just kind of shrug and say, well, I'm sorry, but HO is about 75% of the market, and then about another 10 or 12% is in, and S, I would have to look. But the S scale guys will get all the cars. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I don't know how many, and because that's such a big die-cast cars in 164th, just by luck.
Yeah.
Only that had been 187th that had gotten popular. But the 164th die-cast vehicles, I got stacks of that, where I'll go in some regular hobby shop and I'm like, wow, look, there's old Plymouth Valiant, or look at this old Vista Cruiser wagon with wood, and you can't not buy them. And so, yeah, the 164th cars I'm a sucker for. So if you're a S-scale guy that's frustrated, well, at least you can fill parking lots in ways that we can't even dream of. Yeah. But anyhow, scale trains getting into S scale is huge, as you well know. And the fact that those are coming, that should be a good thing. Some of the S scale guys will get to see a little momentum, hopefully, out of that. Well,
and I'll tell you what, your luck for the guy, if you're an S scale guy, to have anybody come into the S scale arena, it'd be scale trains. Their product is really phenomenal. And I don't own any scale trains. Why? Because everything on my road is 4-axle. So I'm hoping to see scale trains. They've started to venture a little bit towards doing some 4-axle locomotives. Mm-hmm. And hopefully they'll start to really spread their wings a little bit, and maybe some regional roads as well. So, because they've done such a phenomenal job with these Class 1 railroads.
Yes, but they do tend to skew a little more towards contemporary prototypes.
Sure.
Old is 1990s in a lot of cases, although that Jeep 30, oh my gosh. Yeah. And they've had that Jeep 30 at the RPM and a couple other shows. And of course, the wow factor of doing the Union Pacific Jeep 30B, that should be fantastic. So, yes, having scale trains, putting some muscle behind S, it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. After a handful of years. We talked about Atlas. Walthers was at those shows, and the Walthers Proto GP35 is coming back, and I don't know if they really hyped it a lot in their announcement sheet, but when they announced and first brought out the first run or two of those, they're all late production GP35s, and the 35 it runs from 1963 to the end of 1965 is production for Jeep 35s, and most every model you've ever seen from the Athearn Blue Box on always skews towards the Phase 1, and that late Phase 2, which basically I think is mid-1965 to December. So there's a reason why everybody made Phase 1 or some flavor of it, like Cato in the 90s did, 1A this and 1B2 that they did about 3 different Jeep 35s, which were all fantastic for their day. But those first protos were a late phase, which we had not had other than MTH did do one. But this next run has got, they are Phase 1. They're slightly newer Jeep 35s. They're doing a high hood for the first time. They'll be Southern and N&W in their Jeep 35s. But that from Walthers I thought was really neat. And there's a new, Walthers kind of parted with N-scale with respect to diesels and rolling stock. And a lot of that tooling went to like Atlas for most of their freight cars engines that were, some of it was old Lifelike, some of it was Walthers, like Lowell Smith at Railsmith Models has the N-scale passenger cars. But Walthers Cornerstone N-scale, they're still doing a lot of kits and whatnot, and I think they're getting, it's a pole barn with a couple of different sheds as an N-scale Cornerstone release. It's new tooling, and I don't think there's an HO equivalent of it, but it's a case of, man, I wish they'd make that an HO, whereas you always hear the N-scale guy saying, man, I wish they'd make that an N. But look at this pole barn that's coming out, because it's a great piece that it's about 4 or 5 different buildings that could easily help you populate a railroad facility, an industrial or commercial setup thing. I mean, it's a nice kit, and that's coming in scale. And then the other piece that I saw from Walthers recently are those open deck. And boy, this is something we need for all the intermodal stuff that comes out now. And it's a Walthers Scene Master. And the beautiful thing about it, I think I'm looking at it right now, 2 of them for $29.98. They're those flatbed open trailers.
Yeah.
So it's like a 40-foot trailer with just the little end piece. Now, their first ones are only doing straight colors, but if you start looking at pictures, you'll find everybody from Santa Fe to like TP&W also had these, and their herald or logo would have been on that front end of the flatbed. And they're awesome because you can make loads and different things to put on that open bed and put it on a piggyback car. So that's a new tooling piece that I can't remember if Walther's actually, I've got a 3D rendering or an early picture of it, but I didn't see anybody actually show that at the show. So I think it's still fairly early, but it's due out like in the next 6 months or so. But it's amazing the product that comes out now, Ray, and you know that, and you hear people say that all the time. I mean, I think about Model Railroad News is 100 pages, and no joke, every month by the time we start getting down to once the ad reservations are in and it's time to whittle it down to 100 pages to get it ready to go into proofing, I am so far beyond. It'll be like, well, right now it's at 183 pages. And it's like, okay, some of this, it's got to go. We can't get everything into the magazine this month. There's so much product. And I can look back doing research for like HO Collector or on past stuff, and we'll look at like a whole year of Railroad Model Craftsman. And it's like, oh, this was the year that Athearn brought out the Trainmaster and nothing else. And now it's like Athearn every month announces like, 6 or 8 different things. And yet literally it could be like, well, in the last year and a half, they did a rail box, and then they did the Trainmaster. And that's been the second half of the 1970s. It's like, oh my God. In fact, my dad will joke looking at like old Walther's catalogs or some of those magazines when he visits, like, I have no idea why I was even in the hobby back then. Oh, it is amazing. But and it's such fun stuff. Yeah.
I'm fascinated when we were talking a little bit ago about cars and, and the struggle for 1/87th scale, at least, because my layout is in modern era, and it seems to me at least to try to find modern era cars in 1/87th scale. And it's tough, and maybe somebody will step up and fill that market for the modern. I'm sure there's a lot of challenges along with it. But an older car that you covered here in the September issue of Model Railroad News that kind of piqued my interest, but for a very odd reason, which is the Caprice and Impala release here.
Oh, from Rapido Trains.
Rapido. Yeah. So, because I just will have to at least get a Caprice in either green or blue and put it on my layout, but I need a 1/87th scale Frank Drebin to put next to it from the Naked Gun, because that's exactly what I thought. When I saw those cars, my mind went right to the Naked Gun movies and the Caprice that he drove. And
I had forgotten that. Wow. Yeah.
So we need, so if anybody's printing 1/87th scale figures, you're going to have to get a Leslie Nielsen and release it to match those, the Caprices. But yeah,
it was a great pick for him too, because my gosh, that, Chevy jumped on that it came out mid-year 76 as the new downsized Chevrolet. Mm-hmm. And that body style makes it to, it's 1992 before it really gets a total refresh to that rounded kind of bubble looking Caprice.
Right.
And when you think about that, it's like, that's incredible, because most cars get about a 3-year run and then they recycle it into something else. But essentially those from 77 to 91, you got to stop and really look at a Caprice or Impala. They were everywhere, Right. I mean, it was, and they did a 4-door and then they did the wagon. I have talked to them. I think a 2-door is coming, and there'll be more releases and they did some nice like taxi cabs, police cars. I think they did like a Canadian National something. And I shared a picture we had in our files of another like railroad car. Again, they were such a ubiquitous, for a while, everything was those cars, whether it was police, taxi, whatever. And then they all went to the big Ford Crown Vic Lincoln Town Car, became the police car, limousine, taxi cab, that big Panther platform takes it over sometime in the 90s. Right. But yeah, if you're a model railroader and you can't find a place to put one of those, even a fairly contemporary layout, because they were around forever. But
yeah, so great for Rapido to cover this, and what they're going to be able to do is take advantage of what Chevrolet did, which was leave the car exactly the same as you mentioned, and now they've got a world of options within that mold. It seems to cover a lot.
And they are working on more cars. I don't know how soon their next one's going to be coming out, but there are more HO vehicles that did well. And I'm excited to say that, because I collect car brochures is another kind of sideline thing. And I've shared some things on another project they're working on. So more to come for that, which is exciting.
Yeah, so a lot happening there in St. Louis, a lot of product releases, and you're going to cover it all, I'm sure, or as much as you can possibly jam between cover to cover on Model Railroad News. If you haven't subscribed to Model Railroad News yet, Tony, where can you subscribe?
You can go to shop.whiteriverproductions.com and you see I do Model Railroad News. I'm the co-editor with a friend of mine also named Tony Lucio in Kentucky, that we're both big collectors. And HO Collector is now in its 6th year.
Amazing.
Which that amazes me. And it's so exciting because collecting is really big. When people ask, so what's your layout like? What do you operate? Oh, I don't like taking stuff out of the box.
Right.
And then you kind of get that blank stare, like he's joking, right? He's like, well, he might have taken it out of the box, but don't do anything to it. That I love collecting stuff, and HO Collector's been a fun publication. I do that. Then in the last year, Paul Withers retired, and I'm managing editor of Diesel Era, which was always my favorite mag. In fact, it's a disappointment now to do it because it comes in the mail. I'm like, oh, a new Diesel Era. And I open, I'm like, well, I've seen all this. It's like, well, yeah, you did it. It's like, oh, it's like, well, this, it's fun to do, but yeah, that used to be I wonder what they're going to cover this time. Oh, look at that. And it's like, oh yeah, I know what it is. I did it. Right. But yeah, Diesel Era. And then of course our other titles, I think White River now is up to 10 or 12. When Model Railroad News came into the White River fold 10, 11 years ago, we had Passenger Train Journal and Railroads Illustrated. And now with Model Railroad News, the HO Collector that I started, Diesel Era, there's Railroad Model Craftsman, Railfan and Railroad, Narrow Gauge Gazette, Trains and Railroads of the Past, and I'm sure Rail Pace. We do annuals for the narrow gauge set. We do books. Our publisher, Kevin U. Daly, just came out with a beautiful hardcover book on the Kansas City Southern. And what perfect timing is that with the merger and all the talks? This is basically, he's worked for the last 5 years shooting KCS end to end, and his books cover all that. So beautiful kind of tribute to the end of the KCS. But shop.whiteriverproductions.com. Any of the magazines, Google them or look them up on Facebook. I regularly post things there and always answer messages, Facebook posts, all that, because I, like you, Ray, I'm a crazy model railroader that loves talking about. Nothing excites me more than someone going, who made this? I had somebody today send me a picture of, what is this? Who made this? I said, oh, that's the old Marks Depressed Center flat car. No kidding. I couldn't decide what it was. I'm like, I haven't seen one in forever. That's awesome. So, yeah.
I think you're coming upon a new segment called Stump the Tony, where we just start to find something that may stump you or at least give you something. And maybe that may be a real hard one to do. And let me tell you, White River Productions, you've got some great people there between yourself and Otto Vondrak and the rest of your team. And you guys do an excellent job covering this hobby. Really, basically, if you're a rail fan or model railroad or anywhere in between, if you like railroad, you guys got a publication that definitely covers it all. So great to have you on the show. Look forward to having you back with some more Model Railroad News updates. You are certainly the person with their finger on the pulse of the industry, and it's great to hear the inside information. So, Tony, thanks again for joining us.
Ray, my pleasure. I thank you so much for having me on the show. You've got your Around the Layout podcast has been spectacular. It started up and has just taken off. You do a great job. It's fun. It's fun to listen to you and the guests. And it's always a really good, I don't know how many different podcasts or YouTube videos, other things I start, and a few minutes in, I'm like, well, let me go on to Russian car crash videos, and no, I mean, it's good stuff. I really like it. And thanks so much for having me today.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. You'll find more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Learn more about the show and check out past and future episodes on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks again for hanging out with us around the layout.